Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Rocky recap. We are pretty close to catching up to the current day with Rocky shows. This is going to be for April 23rd, 2022, and it's actually the last episode before I'm able to release the more recent ones that I have already edited and made ready to go. So, again, this is for April 23rd, 2022. This is his first appearance after his big announcement, which you'll recall he did say was bigger than the sacrifice of that Italian police officer who admitted to killing a bunch of German soldiers with a grenade in order to save Italian civilians in reprisal killings. So, he billed it as bigger than that significance and sacrifice, and the big reveal is that he will be challenging Kathy Austin running for the 19th district in the state of Connecticut. So, as I hinted to previously, I certainly don't consider that to be a level of sacrifice equivalent, and again, perhaps one might consider it something of a vanity project. Regardless, Easter Sunday, apparently, is the day after April 23rd because the Orthodox folks use a different calendar. So he tries to honor both the Western Christian and the Eastern Orthodox Christian traditions during his show. So he talks about how he's feeding the birds and how doing this makes him very glad, and I'm glad he's doing that as well because their habitat seems to be constantly shrinking. So humans trying to offset that destruction might be something worth doing while we figure out just how it is we're going to not annihilate our biosphere and everything in it, us included. He says that we are slowly gearing up the Ferrari, not a Fiat, but a Ferrari. And now he says that Fiat actually owns Ferrari and laughs. For those that were not used to Rocky specifically, he likes to joke that he and his passionate delivery is like the roaring of a Ferrari engine. So in the days where he's not feeling so up and at 'em, he sometimes jokes that he is a Fiat or some other brand of Italian car whose name I cannot recall at this point. I think Cinque is in the name. Anyway, so he then jokes that that's how the corporate world works, and now Fiat is actually owning Chrysler. So what a wild world we live in. And he asks what we should talk about first, and he wants to first open up the phones to those who disagree. And he says if any illustrious Americans who send him nasty emails want to call in, they should do so. I'm still waiting for replies for my kind emails, but okay. He promises that if you oppose them, you will be allowed 3 minutes of on-air radio time to talk. Paul from Norwich calls in and asks about the signatures for Rocky's campaign and if they've reached that threshold. Says they're not quite ready yet, but suggests putting a sheet in the studio to collect signatures, and thanks him again for running. Brian clipped an article from the day paper about Biden, and apparently he's putting forth a bill for $2.6 billion for gender equity. Apparently that's double of what last year was. And Rocky asks, why do we have to be big brother to the world and throw our money away? I'm not quite sure furthering human rights is the point of the character Big Brother, but okay. He probably thinks Orwell was a right-winger anyways, and would probably call me a Marxist liar if I challenged him on that. But I wonder how he'd respond to Orwell's lesser-known work, Homage to Catalonia, where he talks about fighting with a socialist militia against the fascists in Spain. But, like Martin Luther King, Rocky probably only knows the right-wing approved caricature of Orwell. Rocky says the money never gets to those that need it, and suggests that we should all send $10,000 to each potential immigrant to stay in their country. Is that a serious proposal, Rocky? If it is, I think Rocky just went more left than I think I've ever even been. Anyway, maybe work with a local mutual aid group rather than a corporate charity, and you might get better results. You'll notice they're more honest with the money, generally speaking. And he says these people are vicious and hateful. You mean capitalist grifters? Sure, I absolutely and wholeheartedly agree. But those aren't the only people trying to make things better around the world. Gary from Ledyard calls in and thanks Rocky for putting on some goulashes and jumping into the swamp. Apparently, Rocky got a sign on Palm Sunday. That was the impetus for him deciding to run. Gary apparently nearly ran as well, and talks about how Greg Howard is a voice of reason. Rocky says he's a detective out of Stonington, apparently. Rocky corrects him and says he's not running for state rep, he's actually running against Kathy Austin. And talks about how Rush used to say he would fight these people with half his brain tied behind his back, and Rocky claims that he could certainly do absolutely the same thing, sort of a diss toward Kathy Austin. I don't know much of anything about Kathy Austin, but if she's anyone who can do even the most basic research, I think Rocky would have a very hard time doing it with none of his brain tied behind his back. With that said, he starts to meander and talk about government spending and taxation, and says we need common sense up there. I'm not sure I believe Rocky is the candidate of common sense. Passion, yes. Facts and reason, less reliably so. And then we head off to a break. Time goes by quickly, according to Rocky, and our good friends in the Christian Orthodox Church are celebrating this weekend the day that changed the world, referring, of course, to the resurrection of Jesus. Marvin calls in. Marvin is a very prominent voice in local radio. He is not a host, but does call into just about every show, and his voice is quite well known. Basically, picture mine, but like a little more nasally, and you've got Marvin. He talks about how the Ferrari symbol is a black stallion, and apparently when Marvin went over to Italy, he looked all over Italy and didn't see a single horse. I can't remember if this was Rocky or Marvin at this point that said that a fighter ace during World War I used the black horse, and apparently Enzo Ferrari used the same logo on his stables. They talk about World War I aviation, and he says we were the first ones to drop bombs by hand during World War I. We also made history by hand-dropping bombs on striking mine workers and their families during the Battle of Blair Mountain in 1921. That was West Virginia, by the way. History sucks sometimes. And they talk about their Italian heritage, and then Rocky says he's doing a guided tour of Italy someday, and they can all look for horses together. That sounds fun, but I certainly won't be holding my breath for an invite. Someone named Gary apparently got stabbed in the back by redistricting, and I'm not sure what this is about, but Rocky said he doesn't think that's intentional. It sounds like he doesn't understand what gerrymandering and is and how it works, which again, if this is what he's referring to, is a huge blow to his credibility and probably undercuts his chances for effectively running an office if he's not even sure what gerrymandering is. Quite strange, because I'm almost certain I've heard him reference it before. Rocky brings up Alexios, 10 years old, and Lucas, 18 years old, as his inspiration for running. Rocky says we need to stand up however we can, and says that the voice of freedom, Lee's show, needs to be about more than just this. He says that Marxist ideology is here, and it has been for generations. These ideas, he says, aren't new. No, Rocky, they aren't new. America nearly had a communist revolution before FDR passed the New Deal as a last-ditch effort to buy back some of the loyalty of the American working class. They don't teach that, of course, in school either. Apparently, Giacomo gave Rocky a Saul Alinsky documentary, and Rocky asks, "Do you want that? You want to worship the state?" "Well, I don't, Rocky, and I'm not the one who puts such a massive emphasis and focus on law and supporting the police." He says we have to do it legally and peacefully. It sounds like you worship the state, the arbiter and defender of law, much more than I ever would. All we want, he says, is the pursuit of happiness. I wonder if Rocky knows that it used to be life, liberty, and property. And the fact that it was replaced with the pursuit of happiness, an absolutely meaningless platitude, is probably one of the biggest bait and switches in modern history. At this point, I had to take a call, so I did miss a little bit of this segment, but when I come back in, Rocky opens with a phone call of someone congratulating him for running. I guess this person is named Mona. I hear it a little bit later in the phone call. He says he doesn't want to put his name on posters and other campaign stuff, and that open borders are an abomination. Talks about Switzerland has been at peace for 700 years and hasn't had any problems in quite some time. Again, he's bringing up Switzerland here. It's almost like he does this almost every episode, ignoring the fact that Switzerland has probably been at peace because they have everyone's money and are in an incredibly defensive mountainous position in the middle of the Alps. Perhaps that plays some role as to why they have been at peace for about that long. Anyway, he says that they want us to suffer, and he says that we will stop them. Damien from New London calls in and says, Buongiorno. And he says that you are a blessing and an inspiration, and says that he's ready to help. He says there are people on this station, Rocky says there are people on this station who have explained how the Constitution is useless and we should do away with it. That's not what I said, Rocky, but we've been over this probably in every episode in the past month because he just won't stop talking about it. Anyway, perhaps we'll expand upon that sometime during Lee's show and see if Rocky spends another 3 weeks talking about it. Anyway, Rocky says call in and don't make a nasty email that nobody knows about and goes out to break. Opens with some sort of hymn. Peter Lumage calls in and they talk about their shared politics and being frustrated. Peter Lumage, I'm pretty sure, is still running at this point, and his campaign has been moving for quite some time now. Anyway, another caller comes in and says they've pretty much stopped listening to 94.9 because of the irritating car ads, and apparently a lot of folks have stopped listening. Rocky says that he's glad that this person is a patriot and glad that he still supports him and Lee personally. Ben calls in and speaks about Senator Lumage being great, and we are about to speak to Senator Rocky. They're still running, so the title of senator, I guess, in this case must be aspirational. Does clear up a little bit of my confusion as to what Peter Lumage is running for. Apparently, it's a Senate role of some kind. Apparently, you can run with a nickname or given name, which I guess explains Vermin Supreme. That's probably not his name, but apparently he's been running for president for most of my life. If you're not sure who that is, he's the guy with the boot on his head and says that he is running on a platform of free ponies for everyone and a toothbrush. He was once credited as saying, "I'm going to take your guns away and give you better ones." Obviously, this is a satirical candidate, and in a world as large as ours, you're going to find people that use the levers of power as a form of performance art in order to try to expose some absurdity or maybe just have some fun. Don't forget that Darth Vader once ran for the president of Ukraine. He also ran for Odessa, Ukraine, city council, and there is a fantastic ad out there of a man dressed as Darth Vader with something like 100 stormtroopers marching up the Odessa steps, and the audio goes, Darth Vader.
Это наш город!
Дарт Вейдер, кандидат на посаду Київського та Одеського міського голови.
And so, well, the world is funny. There's lots of silly people out there. This was a meaningless aside, but I sometimes do get sidetracked. Rocky says this is our land, and if we let Marxism take over, we will lose it. I would challenge Rocky to consider that this land was lost to capitalism quite some time ago. You can also bring up, of course, colonialism, but given that he has some other perspectives about the natives, I don't think he will have much sympathy for those people. Tom calls, and he talks about how making vehicles economically friendly is important. I assume he means environmentally friendly, but yeah. I doubt this will be anything other than a vanity project, and I'm reminded of the Green Hornet F-35 powered by vegetable oil or something like that. So whenever they talk about making vehicles environmentally friendly, it's usually just something people do to virtue signal and doesn't often have a real grounding in fact or engineering. I definitely believe in making vehicles more environmentally friendly, but I also am very skeptical when capitalists tell me they are making things more friendly. It's sort of like how Raytheon released a tweet a few years ago talking about how their some sort of ship-based missile was one of the most environmentally friendly missiles out there, and how Raytheon is committed to making a better world for the children all around the world that they don't vaporize. I added that last part. And they talk about how teaching kids sex and that the age can vary depending on the maturity of the child and other factors. And I would say, sure, teaching anyone any sort of concept will have varying efficacy based on their individual characteristics. But I do think at some point we need to figure out a time where it makes sense to teach people about how their bodies work and what is possible for them in their life. And I happen to be of the understanding that it makes sense to teach people that somewhat before the average body starts to be able to be used in a reproductive way. It's important to know before moving through different times in your life what's going to happen to you, in my opinion. Perhaps your opinion is different. But then he talks about how quantum physics is basically equivalent to teaching kids about sex too early. And I don't think there's a similarity there, it's just an overblown comparison. Quantum physics is something almost no adult understands, whereas the basic mechanics of sex are something basically every adult understands. So it's not a one-to-one comparison, and it's just sort of silly in my opinion. Rocky goes out to break and comes back to Mary from East Lyme calling in, saying that we need something for future generations. And boy, I sure do agree. We absolutely need to do something for future generations, which is why, among other things, I'm doing this podcast. I really think it's important that we need to do whatever we can to make life better for future generations, which unfortunately most of the time means challenging the right wing. Anyway, Debbie from Norwich calls in and talks about how transgender education is silly because it's only about 1% of the population. I'm not sure how they tabulate that, and I'm not sure if that is an accurate reflection of the true population. But with that said, generally the right wing seems to be very happy to cater to a different 1%. So I don't know why the 1% factor is prohibitive, given that we basically structure our entire society around a certain other 1%. Anyway, Jim from Lisbon calls in and is congratulating Rocky, and Rocky says it's not me, it's about love of God and country. Apparently, Planned Parenthood wants kids to have sex earlier so that they'll have more babies, presumably to then abort for money. Well, teen pregnancies tend to be highest in states that don't have sex ed, so that idea kind of seems not to be true. John from Lebanon calls in. Lebanon is a place in Connecticut. I'm not referring to the country. Rocky doesn't have quite that large of an audience. And talks about kindergarten sex ed and says it's already going on. Apparently there was a dancing queen that was a guy and didn't catch where this was, so I can't really comment on it. With that said, they say that little boys are wearing makeup and girls' clothes, and apparently girls are taking pills to grow beards. Says apparently, again, this is happening in Lebanon, Connecticut. First I'm hearing of it, but okay. This caller then says that Hillary says that children are the property of the state, and Rocky interjects and breaks in saying Marxists believe that too. Well, Rocky, Amazon funds education programs, and corporations around the world are going back to the company town model, so it seems that the right-wing alternative might be trending toward children being property of the corporation. I'm not a huge fan of children being property, period. Apparently, according to Rocky, Eastern European people are devout Christians, and Marxist ideology is not allowing them to worship. Are you kidding? It's, again, that I'll bring up the rich tradition of leftist Christianity and how Rocky's assertion that Christianity is inherently antithetical toward leftism does not hold water. Also, do keep in mind that the Soviet Revolution was a popular uprising by people who had been organizing a Marxist ideology for literally decades by the time 1917 rolled around. So, to say that these people were always not religious or always were religious, one of those has to be true in order for Marxism to be inherently anti-Christian. Anyway, he at this point, of course, calls Putin a communist and asks how the crazy uncle from New Hampshire feels about it. At this point, Bernie Sanders' Facebook has trended much more toward United States-centric issues, obviously Roe versus Wade being a big one. But if you scroll back to the time of the invasion, Bernie Sanders makes it very clear how he feels about this invasion. He also, throughout his career, has spoken about how he did not like the Soviet Union and how he wasn't a communist. But again, Rocky doesn't care about that, just as he doesn't care that Bernie Sanders is from Vermont, not New Hampshire. He also wouldn't care to know that Putin is not a communist, and as soon as the Soviet Union fell, he joined a center-right party in the Russian Federation and has been firmly right-wing ever since. But again, narrative, not facts, on The Rocky Radio Show. So basically, Rocky closes his show asking what a person who denies being a communist thinks about a person that Rocky thinks is a communist, despite his decades of post-Soviet rulership and allegiance to right-wing parties within Russia. So once again, Rocky shows time after time that he doesn't care about facts and is not a reliable source of information. I would never presume to take his freedom of speech, but I'd be remiss if I didn't use my own freedom of speech to expose Rocky for what he is, a passionate, energetic, politically clueless demagogue. And I can't wait to see how this first debate in the Senate goes for Rocky and Kathy Austin. That's going to be very interesting because for the first time, probably in quite some time, he's going to be put in the awkward position of having to shout all he knows, Bircherite talking points to someone who, realistically speaking, probably has a background in politics and rational debate. And that will probably be quite a bit of fireworks. I look forward to seeing it. Have a great day.
Eat meat and drive trucks and shoot guns and don't trust in the federal government to solve our problems. You might think I'm joking, but I'm not a Republican. Call me when your president pulls out of Afghanistan, 'cause that's the day I'll get a cell phone number and you can call and leave a message on voicemail that day.